So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay and to a siege battle from the RP series which is ongoing at the moment, albeit there probably will be about a month's delay between when I've actually been sent this and when it actually comes out due to the backlog that I'm currently working to, which is actually a good thing from my perspective, but some players and people who send me in battle replays might get slightly perturbed that I'm not releasing the battle replays as quickly as they may like, especially when it pertains to an RP focused one such as this, because it means that there is a little bit of lag and the situation may have developed since then, but there's nothing really I can do about that, so hopefully Lord of Belagost won't mind too much that this is the case. And this is a rather unique battle as well. I mean, for a start we have one of these settlements which we haven't seen this layout of settlement for a little while. You essentially have these elven bridges on the interior of the settlement, which are good places to put your archers once your outer defences have been breached for the first time. It makes it a potentially very painful march through the settlement for the attackers, and there are two layers really to this particular battle, because it is a 2v4, the Sons of Feanor on the defence having to face down a 4-army composition of the Easterlings here. And the reason why this is kind of multi-layered is the first question is, can the defenders actually hold out? A 2v4 is even more difficult than a 5v3 really, because at least with 3 you can use your third army to cover more angles, whereas especially in a settlement like this where there are numerous ways in, be it through gates, holes in the palisade walls that artillery can create, or of course siege towers, there's a lot of ground for just 2 armies to cover, so it is going to be very difficult for the defenders to ultimately win. But there is another angle to this as well, and that is the fact that the Easterlings in an RP focused game like this, especially when they have the edge in terms of numbers, they're going to need to win comfortably in order to really press home the advantage on the overall map. So really a Pyrrhic victory simply won't do. An overall victory for Feanor is obviously crushing for the Easterlings, but so too is a victory where Feanor really make the Easterlings pay for it. The only way the Easterlings can truly be happy with a result here is if they win the battle by sort of more than 20-25% even. Whereas Feanor, they would be okay considering the state of the RP map, I think, with a victory for the Easterlings that was more costly than that, but of course they will be attempting to outright win, because then they themselves can seize the advantage a little bit more in the overall RP and maybe start pushing the Easterlings back. So yes, going to be interesting to see. It's going to be a little less cut and dry who we decide, how it's decided who has truly got the better of this battle. But we will go through the attackers first and foremost in front of the palisade walls around the settlement. We shall start off with Scribe Untitled, which is a name I haven't seen before, the first Easterling army we shall look at. Warband of Lothlin will struggle in melee against most of the Feanor infantry. In general, you can actually see one of them's already been hit by one of the arrow towers, I think, so it looks like he's about to keel over dead. But yeah, the Easterling infantry in general, the basic stuff, the more damaging and more fragile units from the Easterlings, I think will struggle slightly against Feanor. They do have quite a lot of anti-cavalry available to them, both the Falksmen and the spears they have available to them. But really I think it's going to be the Lothlin units that we see here. The Wardens of Lothlin, obviously heavier spears, this heavier armour is the sort of thing which will come in very handy against Feanor. Of course, most of their damage dealing potential comes from heavy swordsmen who lack armour piercing, of course. So this armour will help keep them alive, and we've seen in the past this Easterling heavy infantry is something which they very much lean on quite heavily in matchups like this. Especially, you have to say, the Halberdiers of Lothlin. Feanor themselves don't have access to a phalanx unit. It's going to be useful for warding off cavalry strikes as well, but having an armour-piercing phalanx against a force like Feanor is going to be very, very important for the Easterlings' overall chances here. And it can make the Sons of Feanor's job much harder once the Easterlings really start to gain a bit of momentum in the settlement and start slowly pushing and constricting Feanor to the centre of the settlement. The one problem that they may have with a unit like the Halberdiers is of course the threat that ranged units pose in a settlement like this. Of course, Feanor, there are other elven factions within Silmarillion that do have better archers and more damaging archers, but you don't need hyper damaging archers against a unit like the Halberdiers here, because they're unshielded. The armour will save them to a certain extent, but yeah, I mean, there are also some good javelin units that Feanor have access to as well. The Sons of Ulfang are a little bit of an exception to what I was just saying, because while most of the Falksmen do not have access to the armour piercing that would be kind of necessary against Feanor, the Sons of Ulfang do. They are technically a bodyguard tier unit, single HP and slightly fragile compared to their peers though they may be, the big serrated foxes that they wield are going to be very, very useful for their armour piercing. One of the units that will give Feanor pause in just pure melee terms. Just over here we can see another unit of Warband of Lothland pushing up a ram, a second unit of Sons of Ulfang as well. That is a big financial commitment in the RP overall, so again, more examples of the fact that the Eastlings really do need to win this with something to spare, you would say. Warband of Lothland, we have some halberdiers pushing up this ram, a catapult which is manned by Warband of Lothland, which by artillery crew standards in Silmarillion is actually fairly basic. A lot of artillery crews are more impressive units than this, but even so, artillery in general will be very useful for peeling away the walls that we see. Warband of Lothland. We also have the Amberona Honour Guard, which are the other units of bodyguard tier infantry that these things have. This is a little bit more traditional, very defensive in nature, multiple HP, big shield value, good armour as well, especially in comparison to a lot of the other Easterling units. Exactly the sort of thing which actually could be seen as being in the mould of Feanor themselves as well, so that is going to be interesting to see how they match up against their fellow heavy infantry units on the other side of the battle today. Pillagers of Himring, a throwing projectile cavalry unit, as well as we saw over on the other side some Fangs of the Faithless, some spoilers of Dorkaranthe. These are two, an archer unit and a standard unit of Falksmen, but as we were saying on the other side, Salamandrine Guard, so horse archers and throwing axe cavalry, which, considering there's probably going to be a sally forth from heavy Feanor cavalry, in straight up fighting, of course, the Feanor cavalry will have a big advantage over any Easterling riders, but the Easterlings, if they be tricksy with it, they can certainly make life very awkward for Feanor. If their cavalry can't really pay for itself, that's going to make an overall victory next to impossible, really, as it already is. Croatani marauders with some throwing axes as well, so this is the sort of thing which, when the fighting gets a little bit more grindy on the streets within the settlement, we could start to see them really come into their own. We have a bit of a box situation going on here from Tundra's Fox, so he has got his eyes set on the Feanor cavalry, I'm sure. Wardens of Lothland are here. We've already seen from a distance in the other army composition the Salamandrine Guard, which, to be fair, as far as cavalry goes, considering they're up against Feanor, the Easterlings do find themselves outgunned, really, but the Salamandrine Guard against most other factions would be a very scary thing, because not only are they very accomplished horse archers, but they are good in melee against other cavalry as well. I believe they actually have an anti-monster bonus as well, which is not useful against Feanor, but it is something to their, another feather in their cap, so to speak. But yes, it does make the job of the Feanor cavalry harder, because the Salamandrine Guard won't go down easily, even if Feanor do still have the edge in terms of cav. Fangs of the Faithless are the Eastlings' only option as far as archers go. Pretty decent as well. I mean, they can trade blows with enemy archers fairly nicely, albeit again, this is an area where Feanor's heavy archers will have the edge. And the Fangs of the Faithless, despite looking very impressive, are actually not amazing in melee. It's more for their defensive values that they can be useful in melee. They're not going to do an awful lot of damage if things come to that. Wardens of Lothland and Halberdiers are still here. More Salamandrine Guard. Wardens of Lothland are still here as well. Amberona Honour Guard and more catapult crews and warbands of Lothland as well. So plenty of siege towers here acting as a sort of makeshift wall for any archers that may have been present. But this part of the settlement has already been abandoned by Feanor. They have to make themselves smaller, essentially, constrict the settlement a little bit more so that their lack of numbers doesn't really harm them too much. Now then, the next Easterling army is a Dead Salmon. We have got some Warband of Lothland. We saw, again, we glossed over them a little bit in the first army composition, but Despoilers of Dorkaranthe are actually a very good shock infantry unit, as with most Falksmen from the Eastlings. They do have a good charge bonus as well, but where they do fall down is that they don't have that armour piercing that is necessary against certain factions, Feanor included, to be truly cost effective, really. Feanor have got all of the answers to them in melee and at range to make them a much more difficult unit to use. There is exceptions to this. Any of the human units as part of Feanor's roster will struggle against their eastern brethren here in the Despoilers, but I don't know if the Eastlings are necessarily going to be able to pick and choose their engagements quite so neatly. Catapult ready to bombard the walls, of course. We have some more Sons of Ulfang, by far and away the scariest infantry unit in terms of damage that the Eastlings can field against Feanor, as I've already mentioned. You may say the Halberdiers are actually overall the more useful unit, but we'll have to wait and see on that. The Swordsmen, the Clan Guard of Lothland, they're obviously going to be a little bit more capable of dealing damage than the Wardens, the spear variant, of course, but again, when it comes to heavy armour, shielded, sworded infantry, Feanor are obviously going to have the edge over the Eastlings in that capacity, as I'm sure we shall see. Warband, Clan Guard, more Despoilers pushing up the ladders. We've got some Amberona Honor Guard, more Fangs of the Faithless. Several units of Marauders of Himring, which we haven't seen up to this point. This is essentially the dismounted version of the Cavalry we've already seen again. More throwing projectiles, which is where the Easterlings do most of their ranged fighting, of course, only having access to one Horse Archer and one Foot Archer, whereas the rest of their ranged units are all going to be throwing projectiles. Inside a settlement, though, that is very often more useful for the attackers because it's something the defenders can't afford to ignore. And then several units of Halberdiers in a big block back here, including full units and detachments. The sort of thing which Feanor are really going to have to prioritise here in this fight if they are to be anywhere close to victorious. And finally, Panthan of Barsoom has got some Marauders of Himring as well. We have got some more Clan Guard. Has he got any other units that we haven't seen up until now? Fangs the Faithless and Despoilers we have already seen. We've also already seen some Wardens of Lothlin, a Catapult Crew, Halberdiers, Warband pushing up the Ram, more Sons of Orfang, less Siege Towers over here, so a little bit more open to ranged attack. Wardens of Lothlin, Halberdiers, Warband. We do have a Siege Tower over here with some Clan Guard pushing it up, and also we have got some Salamandrian Guard, who of course can deploy stakes, which is fairly unique for Cav, seeing as, you know, you'd think Cav would want to stay away from stakes, but could be useful here as Feanor make the attempts to sally forth with some cavalry at the very least. And we have Lord of Balagost, and I believe Wally Wolf is the other player who is on the defence today, playing as Halavorn. Feanor, Halavorn is an element of their army though. We have some Stalkers of Thargallion, which I'll refer to them as skirmishing javelins. They're javelins that don't have armour piercing but have far more range and more ammunition, so they can continuously fire at the enemy. And against some of the lighter Easterling units, having extra ammunition is going to be important. Not particularly great in melee though, but then again they are one of the cheaper units that Feanor has to offer, so it's all about how you utilise your lower quality units though, as well as your higher quality ones. This is the armour piercing variant, however, these sort of more damaging javelins as we shall call them, because they do have armour piercing. Rangers of Halavorn will be very, very useful for breaking up halberdier blocks or going after more dangerous targets like the Sons of Ulfang. This is going to be one of the more important units for Feanor to utilise if they hope to get any sort of success out of this fight, I think. You need to show a bit of patience with the ammunition on this, because if you waste it, certainly in a 2v4, it's not the sort of thing you can recoup. Over here, this is where, of course, Feanor are going to be dominant against the Easterlings. Like I said, the Lothlin units are all well and good, but fully upgraded footmen of Amras like this are one of the finer units of standard line infantry that the game has to offer before you start getting into bodyguard tier units, which of course muddies the waters a little bit more. As far as standard units that you can build more of your army around, the footmen of Amras are arguably the strongest line infantry unit you can field when they're fully upgraded like this, but again, situationally, I would say, is the key word there. Rangers of Halavorn are here. We have some cavalry as well from Feanor as well. You would expect the Mounted Company of Carufin, which interestingly enough are the Javelin cavalry, so going to be trading blows with the ranged cavalry from the Easterlings, which are going to be circling like vultures around the outside of the settlement. I mean, even here, the Mounted Company of Carufin 1-to-1 will be able to defeat most of the Easterling cavalry, but the Salamandrian Guard can keep them at arm's length, of course, which will prove to be a problem for Balagost if he doesn't appropriately respond. The Accursed of Alqualonde are a very, very powerful unit of heavy swordsmen, of course, because they are relentless, meaning they can't be staggered. Their stats are very, very high. Exactly the sort of thing which is going to be able to cut through many, many Easterlings. They don't have armour piercing, so the Lothlin units will put up more of a struggle than the other units the Easterlings have to offer, but still exactly the sort of unit which Feanor can count on to be stronger, individually speaking, than anything the Easterlings will have on their side today. We have some more footmen of Amras as we make our way further back into the settlement. It's actually Farkin, not Morning Wolf. I apologise. We have some upgraded archers of Amrod. Like I said, these walkways and how well Feanor use their ranged units, not just their javelins but also their archers, is going to play a huge part in how successful this Feanor-led defence is going to be. Back in the town centre we have some shield bearers of Halavorn, a standard unit, obviously as spears. They can help form a front line, more of a workhorse unit that isn't quite so expensive as much of the rest of the Feanor roster. Obviously Feanor, one of the very first factions alongside Angband and Assyrian that was added to Silmarillion, so kind of contrary to a lot of the other factions that have come later, to be fair, with their more heavy armour focus, obviously very quality centric as well, as most of the Elven factions in the game are. Upgraded Defenders of Aglon are another such unit, fantastic, heavy swordsmen, very damaging, exactly the sort of thing which will be a worry to a lot of the Easterling units. Like I said, the Despoilers of Dor Caranthir are all well and good, but matching up poorly to the Defenders of Aglon, really. But We'll have to wait and see. More Rangers of Hellavold here in high numbers, actually. More Accursed of Alqualonde, which of course are even more of a threat than the Defenders of Aglon, given their relentless nature. More Footmen of Amras. Actually, no, Wally Wolf is here. So wait, it's a 3v4? I could have sworn Balagos told me it was a 2v4, but then again, it was a little while ago he actually sent this one to me, so either way, the same thing does apply. I believe the Easterling... I mean, I'd be more willing to give Feanor a fair crack of the whip, given that this is the odds we're dealing with. Stalkers of Thargelion, Archers of Amrod, more Defenders of Aglon, and Shield Bearers of Hellavold, so plenty of archers, but which are on the outside of the settlement, you'd have to say. Footmen of Amras, Arrow Towers already firing away into the Easterling ranks. More Rangers of Hellavold, there's plenty of Rangers of Hellavold. If they can use all of these armour-piercing javelins to good effect, this could be a messy fight for the Easterlings indeed. Defenders of Aglon, more Footmen of Amras, more Mounted Company of Karufin as well, but no truly damaging cavalry, you'd have to say. We're not dealing with the likes of the Roqueni here. And then over here we have some Stalkers of Thargelion up on the walkways as well. That's pretty much it. There are some more Archers of Amrod and more Stalkers up here on the walkways too, but we kind of get the idea here at this point. If I've missed any units, it's just because they're going to be in and amongst others. And yeah, I guess there's no need for a cut in this battle. It's not overtly long, and also the action is already underway with these arrow towers over here. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road. So one thing to consider here, I think, is the fact that because the Eastlings have got sufficient numbers and siege towers to actually blanket the walls, while it may not be ideal, they may consider using some artillery to actually take down these towers, because there are a fair few of them, and they won't take too much punishment from the artillery, so time will tell what it is that Dead Salmon and his fellow men of the East are going to be doing. I think actually what we will be doing, first and foremost though, is going to turn it down to half speed, because there's going to be an awful lot happening right from the off here, with Mounted Company of Karufin from the defenders being sent forth. You can see that some of them do actually have the armour upgrade as well, so they're going to be a little bit more resilient, especially when it comes to the kind of kiting tactic which I'm sure the Easterlings with their Salamandrine Guard are going to try to employ. Interesting to see them going after the Marauders of Himring. This may just be due to circumstance. The cavalry may just be establishing a position, and then because they're on fire at will, they're going after something. With hard target javelins, of course, you'll generally want to be going after the more solid Easterling troops, but Marauders arguably do represent a bigger threat to Feanor once they're on the inside here. Meanwhile, Salamandrine Guard right in here, in melee with the Mounted Company of Karufin. Like I said, the Salamanders are very capable of looking after themselves in melee against other cavalry, but the Mounted Company of Karufin do double as heavier sword cavalry than themselves in melee, so it's not the sort of fight they really want to be going after. I mean, like I said, in the composition phases, the Easterlings do have the cavalry to be certainly an annoyance to many other forces, but they are dealing really with the best heavy cavalry focused army in the game in Feanor, and while they may only have their javelin cavalry here, that's still going to prove to be a significant hurdle for any Easterling riders to have to overcome. And once they get inside the settlement, of course, the Salamanders may prove to be less effective, so they kind of have to throw themselves in front of the Mounted Company here, because they really don't want to be taking too many losses like they just did to more important units like their Sons of Ulfang, their best damage-dealing infantry. Meanwhile, Tundra's Fox has got a much more simple approach to the fortress, with no one actually defending his approach, so he can attack at his leisure. There's no cavalry sally outs here against the Dead Salmon's forces, but you can see plenty of death and destruction already inflicted on the despoilers of Dor Caranthea there. I'd imagine that comes from more than just the arrow towers. You can see here Archers of Amrod taking up a very nasty looking position, which has almost certainly dealt the first blows. Nothing really from the catapult as of yet, and it is worth mentioning as well that those arrow towers will continue to do their thing. Again, arrow towers do damage very, very slowly, but the Easterlings, especially with their more fragile units, it's not the sort of thing they can really afford to take lightly. Meanwhile, you can see that still the Easterlings are being forced into ever more defensive shapes by the sally out of cavalry, so it's actually a pretty good start here from Feanor, and I don't think the Easterlings have dealt with their various challenges too well so far, but it is very early days, of course, and as soon as Tundra's Fox starts moving through the settlement, which he will do because he's completely unimpeded, things will change up significantly, but the rest of the Easterlings will need to move to join him in the settlement pretty quickly, otherwise he may find himself bearing the brunt of all of Feanor's wrath. Salamandrine Guard using their flaming shots, Mounted Company of Carufin already doing their thing. Doing a lot of damage to those despoilers of Dorcaranthi. Not as dangerous to Feanor's infantry as the Sons of Ulfang because of that lack of armor piercing, but still not the sort of thing they can really afford to lose free of charge. Meanwhile, this Warband of Lothland has managed to get their ram to the gate, so the first gaps in Feanor's fortifications will be exploited here. Still on time, well, still on half speed as well, because there's an awful lot going on, and in fact you can see that the Easterlings are now starting to occupy the walls, albeit Footmen of Amras are going to start contesting the walls, and they will easily be able to deal with Warband of Lothland, the entry-level spearmen that they are. Exactly the sort of thing which is very useful at dealing with the kind of arrow fire from the walls and sally outs from cavalry, but as soon as it gets down to business in melee, not so much. Catapults starting to peel away at some of the palisade walls as well. Sons of Ulfang taking direct hits from the Rangers of Hellevorn. Like I said, Rangers of Hellevorn and their choice of targets are going to be absolutely vital, really, for Feanor's chances, and the Sons of Ulfang, one of the better targets certainly they can go after because of how dangerous they are in melee. They don't have much ammunition though, of course. Armor-piercing javelins and Silmarillion rarely do, so they're going to have to get into melee now, which is not going to be ideal for them. They do outnumber them at least, well, around 2 to 1. Mounted Company of Carufin. Are they going after the arrow towers, I wonder, as they continue to fire away another unit of Sons of Ulfang? I mean, we could start to see some of these siege towers set ablaze as well. Clan Guard of Lothland going up against the Footmen of Amra, so line infantry versus line infantry, but like I said at the beginning, as good as the Clan Guard of Lothland are in their class, they are going up against one of the finer examples in the Footmen of Amras. That double armour upgrade they have as well is going to make life very difficult for the Easterling Clan Guard to actually do damage, and with the Accursed of Alcolonde up here as well, it's going to be a very one-sided affair. But maybe overcommitting, maybe preempting the Sons of Ulfang's movements. There's still a lot of reinforcements from the Easterlings that have yet to be committed, and they do appear to be going after primarily some of the walls first and foremost. What's going on over here? So that was where the other section of wall has been dismantled. I mean, Tundra's Fox starting to be more of a factor in this battle as well, because they are defending the outer walls in every other capacity here, Feanor, but if they don't guard their flanks against Tundra moving through the streets, it's going to prove to be a real problem for them in the long run, I think. Halberdiers of Lothland a good target here for Farkin's Mounted Company to go after, perhaps, and also the archers from the walls already starting to shoot into them as well. Exactly the sort of thing they need to be getting rid of. Like I said, the Halberdiers is probably the single most dangerous thing to Feanor's infantry. The Sons of Ulfang will deal damage more quickly, but the Halberdiers will really make life difficult for Feanor if they can get situated within the settlement. Meanwhile, the cavalry has certainly succeeded in delaying a few of the armies here, and having a slightly broken feeling to their assault may give Feanor the opportunity to organise themselves just so. Mounted Company of Carufin within the walls now, using their own javelins, the Rangers of Hellevorn having already inflicted a bit of pain on these Sons of Ulfang. Now it's going to be the turn of the Mounted Company, while the Rangers simply hold them at bay in melee, of course. And they are shaken here, the Easterlings not enjoying the treatment they're getting at the hands of the elves and their human companions up on these walls, and the Warband of Lothland, they're not going to last too much longer, you'd have to say. So far so good, but it needs to continue in this vein pretty much for the entire battle for Feanor to have much of a chance at winning. Like I said, funds-wise, the Eastlings have got everything they need, quality-wise as well. Numbers, every advantage really goes to the Eastlings in this fight to a greater or lesser extent, other than the fact that Feanor have got the defensive position. Another hole in the wall. These Mounted Company units from Lord of Belagos being used more defensively within the walls, but still using their javelins against the Eastlings that are already up here. As Tundra's Fox continues to move unimpeded, the arrow towers will do their thing, but the ram also getting through here. What's going on? They do need to future-proof a little bit against Tundras, because Lord of Balagos and Wally Wolf are very eager to guard the east and west walls. The Warband of Lothland are going to do extremely poorly, even more poorly against the defenders of Aglon than they would against the Footmen of Amras, because of the sheer damage that can be dealt. Meanwhile, look at the counter-attack. Tundra continues to have a rather quiet opening to the battle, but over here, Dead Salmon trying to use his ram on the front wall, but Wally Wolf counter-attacking outside and with no units nearby to actually support the warband of Lothlin. Once again, these poor entry-level Easterling spears are going to find themselves really struggling a great deal to impose themselves on the battle at all. Still, while there's still cavalry outside the walls, it is going to remain a half-speed battle for the time being. Mounted Company of Cavalry continuing to chase them. Rather interesting thing, but again, the Mounted Company could be better off maybe going after this, but you can see now all of the Salamandrine Guard are going to try and isolate and destroy the Mounted Company that's still outside the walls, with Belengoths of course still being within the walls, being used significantly more defensively. That's really the only offensive action that the defender's going to be able to take outside of more straightforward infantry-based counter-attacks such as this one. You can see here that Parthan of Barsoom still yet to commit more of his units forward, and you can see that the ram has actually been abandoned as well. So still all is quiet here in the north. All of the action happening so far on the flanks. And you can see that the accursed Alqualonde kind of engaging with a detachment of halberdiers of Lothlin, but thinking better of it in the long run. What's going on here? It's a little bit weird. I assume that the siege tower is about to drop, and that's why we're seeing such oddities, but Footmen of Amras continuing to hold the walls as you would expect. And the Clan Guard of Lothlin, I do like I think it was the Rajput inspiration for this, the Lothlin, the upper end Lothlin units for the Eastlings. I think it really does work for them. You can see that they still have that link to the runic units of the Third Age, but it's certainly something all of their own. Bit of a golden age for them as well, wasn't it? Still, sword to sword, the artillery continues to bombard the front. Are they trying to... That's a little bit of an interesting call, that, to not use your ram, but instead use artillery ammunition on the gates when you don't really need to. I mean, it means that you don't have to commit your infantry close to the arrow towers, but that seems to be a bit of a moot point, really. Over here, Sons of Ulfang, I mean, they're doing a lot of damage to the... I think they're doing... Yeah, they're doing damage to the Rangers of Helleborn, but the arrow towers, in conjunction with the numbers disadvantage they were already suffering from, proving to be the difference maker here. Warband, Footmen of Amras. There's also still the archers within the settlement, which is the sort of thing which is very difficult to keep track of in any battle, but certainly here, this sort of secondary line of archers which are already now being utilised. Are they going to go after halberdiers? Perhaps the Sons of Ulfang. Again, all of the unshielded Easterling units are exactly where Feanor need to train their arrows on, and they are going after the Sons of Ulfang here, so that'll make pretty quick work of them, you would suggest. Over here, seeing a little bit more movement now, maybe as a result of the cavalry over in this part of the battlefield. Salamandrine Guard overrunning the Mounted Company of Karuk, and of course Tundra's Salamanders fresh to the battle, whereas Farkin's Mounted Company already seeing a good deal of action, effective action, but now the Eastlings will be all too happy to remove the fast movers that Feanor have still on the outside of the settlement. There's still another unit of Salamandrine Guard which can be moved in as well, but for the time being they're just being used for their bows, so yeah, this is a good move from the Easterlings, dealing with this, and then they can, at their leisure, move their various infantry units forward. Speaking of which, I think that is exactly what's going to be happening. Dead Salmon moving a few more units forward, the Footmen of Amras moving back within the walls a little bit with the arrival of some more serious infantry in the Clan Guard of Lothlin. This warband having already taken a fair amount of damage. The Marauders of Himring also trying to get into position to do some damage with their throwing axes to the footmen. Still plenty of reinforcements, a lot of Helleborn units, as well as some more heavy Elven infantry. Well, this fight was over pretty quickly indeed. The Feanor heavy swordsmen doing the business against those warband. I mean, the Despoilers of Dor-Caranthia will put up more of a fight, like I said, but still the Defenders of Aglon will be all too happy to face them in melee, especially with a bit of support from the arrow towers as Tundra's Fox continues to make his way around. I think actually we can probably go up to 1 speed at this point, given that the outside of the settlement is not being as active as it once was. Well, Halberdier is getting up on now. Now we can finally see the Sons of Ulfang claiming the walls as well. So this is where Feanor will need to make some choices, because they're starting to come under a lot more pressure on the two flanks on their outer walls. And I do think they are going to need to start retreating further back into the settlement, allowing their archers of Amrod and the like to start doing a lot of the heavy lifting. The frame drops when the walls start crumbling has always been a bit of a weird one to me. It's, you know, it is what it is. Bit of cavalry here, mounted company of Karufin, who are routing back within the settlement. Last stand. Standing here now. Rangers of Halavorn, are we starting to see a little bit more movement down here? Not really. The catapult crew starting to unleash and poke a few more holes in the outer walls. This is where the Easterling numbers will start to come into play, which is why I said Feanor really should be thinking of moving back, leaning more heavily on the elven walkways that are within the settlement and using the choke points a little bit further back. It's not completely ideal. Meanwhile, Rangers of Halavorn are doing some good damage to the advancing halberdiers, who are getting a little bit further ahead of themselves than is typical. Some very nice point-blank volleys, though, doing an awful lot of damage. And the Rangers of Halavorn are not hopeless in melee. They can look after themselves, but it's definitely more of an auxiliary feel to their ranged contributions, you would have to say. Or Warband of Lothlin, and yeah, this is where they really should be starting to swarm in. I would be committing pretty much everything if I were one of the outer Easterling armies at this point. There's still some Footmen of Amras here on the flank, mopping up some Warband of Lothlin. I mean, the Easterlings can't afford to leave completely healthy units of infantry like this all to their own devices either. There's still a presence from Feanor out here, which, if they play their cards right, they can deal with efficiently. You can see the Amberona Honour Guard are coming up here. I mean, they will easily deal with Rangers of Halavorn, and more slowly, but they will also be superior to Footmen of Amras. It's going to take something a little bit more high quality. It is interesting, actually. Feanor, one thing they don't have at their disposal, really, is bodyguard tier units. The highest tier infantry unit they have, really, is the Accursed of Alqualonde here. They don't have their Otorn Maitimo, their answer to a sword and shield bodyguard unit. They don't have their Roqueni Magloro, their mounted bodyguard. So they're having to deal with mostly, you'd have to say, a bit of damage being done by attacking cavalry here, but mostly their entry-level units, their human auxiliaries, and some mid to high tier, but without having to rely on their bodyguard tier units. That's one thing that I didn't actually take into account. Maybe there is Otorn Maitimo hidden in and amongst here somewhere, but it doesn't look like it. And maybe that's one area in which the Easterlings have managed to catch Feanor unawares here. More of their own units, meanwhile Croatani Marauders doing damage to the Stalkers of Thargelion just in behind. Moving around up there on the bridge, but a bit of a counter-attack here from Feanor. Again, not committing enough forward here, the Easterlings. Too many of their units still too far back, a little bit stretched, and Feanor acting as a cohesive whole more so, and able to simply run through the underprepared attackers. Meanwhile, you can see the Eastlings are now preparing a genuine assault inside the walls. Pretty much everything that Parthena Barsoom has at his disposal is now moving forward. Large-scale attack underway here as well from Dead Salmon, but so far being held at bay by Feanor. Still some spearmen and rangers ready as well, should they be needed. Archers of Amrod in melee. Footmen of Amras, 2 Stalkers of Thargelion getting involved, pulling out their hand axes to assist the elves, but you can see the halberdiers starting to roll forward, and that is where the Easterlings will be hoping to lay down a marker against their opponents here. Footmen of Amras, there's still Archers of Amrod, the arrow towers continue firing away. Catapult crew there. A lot of units from Dead Salmon. Tundra's Fox offering his support as well with... Well, actually that Marauders of Himring shooting at the... well, throwing at the defenders of Aguilon up on the walls, but you can see here that more of a desperate situation over here. Amberona Honour Guard in here with a lot more Lothlin units. Feanor starting to struggle on the back foot a little bit more. And also with Fangs of the Faithless shooting into position, obviously poison arrows, lowering the morale of the defending infantry, which can be a problem for Feanor, because of course they do have something of a reliance on their human auxiliaries for numbers. The elves will be a little bit more resilient to morale shocks such as this, but you have to say, with the amount of Hellborn units over here, those poison arrows should be just what the Doctor ordered for the Easterlings to make up for the slightly slow start, and more we're starting to see the Easterlings claim a little bit more of the momentum, I think. More javelins hitting arrows from on high as well, you can see up in the walkway overhead, so faster and more decisive damage dealt by the javelins, but it's going to be more consistent damage dealt by the archers, and not going to be great for the halberdiers certainly. The Wardens of Lothlin with those shields will be a little bit more resilient, at least to the archer fire they're having to endure. Javelins still doing their things. Meanwhile, Curse of Alqualonde moving backwards. There's still some Fangs of the Faithless now trying to skirmish down the Feanor units, which launched a successful counter-attack down this street, but how many of those do they have in them? You have to wonder. That wall has been secured. A little bit of a counter-attack here from the flank as well. Units that maybe were going up against Parthan and Barsoom, or intended to be, are now going to try and move into the side of this force over here, with the Footmen of Amras still fighting the good fight up on the walls. Amberona Honor Guard actually fairly depleted. The Arrow Tower certainly helping the Footmen of Amras, but they're certainly going to need that. Halberdiers keeping the Crimson-clad Elves at bay, but they should be overwhelmed here, if I'm being honest. This is the sort of thing which will worry the Easterlings, though, because I'm not sure they have a huge amount that they can... I mean, Despoilers of Dor Caranthea can be moved across, and indeed they will be. Fangs of the Faithless still skirmishing with the enemy. But pretty much everything from Scribe Untitled is now in the walls to one extent or another. Depending on how much damage they've taken up till this point will determine how useful they can be. Tundra, meanwhile, far and away, of course, the one who had to deal with the least on the approach. And it does show, because it is from south, despite the fact that Feanor are now starting to lock things down a little bit more. Still struggling a bit, not many defenders of Aglon remaining. His Warband could rout, and maybe routing is one way in which Feanor can also make their presence felt. Salamandrine Guard, poison projectiles and flaming projectiles. You can certainly see over here that it's a losing battle for Feanor in this part of the fortress, with the sheer numbers the Easterlings are bringing, but also genuine quality in here as well with the Honor Guard. Damage being done to the units that are facing the wrong way as well. All of these Warband of Lothlin units now going to prevent the Footmen of Amras from being used as reinforcements. I mean, they'll lose, but making the Feanor assault a little bit more compartmentalised, a bit more disjointed, can only help the Easterlings at this point. Walls of Himring up on the walls now. It's never a particularly great sign for the defenders if the attackers are able to get damaging skirmishers up on the walls. There are still reinforcements able to be committed forward, but now you can see that the attacking skirmishers being used to very good effect. I think at this point Feanor... Oh, yeah, that's going to be nasty as well. You don't want to be losing a Curse of Alqualonde like that. Easterling General being lost, though, in the part of the battlefield where they are actually struggling a bit more, so... Like I said, the Easterlings, morale-wise, I mean, we're seeing some Hellborn units routing, but morale shocks are one way in which the Easterlings could start to struggle. Parsan's army is also going to be moving through the streets now as well. Once again, we're seeing the units in the walkways above starting to fire down, but this is a very large concentration. Trying to use sheer force to smash through these choke points with his army, which also, much like Tundra, he did deal with some harassment from the cavalry earlier on, but Parthan's army in the north and Tundra's army in the south didn't have to deal with as much damage in the initial stages of the battle as their two allies on the east and west walls did. The Curse of Alqualonde, of course, with their relentless traits, exactly the sort of thing which will be very good at dealing with the Warband and the Despoilers. The armour on the Lothlin units will help them a little bit more, but it is what it is. We've got here Wardens of Lothlin, Mounted Company of Carufin moving in as well. This little counter-attack is going okay for Feanor. I don't know whether it's the sort of thing which is necessarily going to completely save the battle for them, but it's the sort of thing that Easterlings can't afford to discount at this point, because the Halberdiers are going to be overcome. There's Honour Guard, there's still 34 of them. It's a bit of a... I mean, they're making slow work of the Footmen of Amras, that second hit point ever important. There's still the Pillagers of Himring out there as well, some throwing axe cavalry, which could be committed at any moment. Despoilers, more and more units wanting to be committed forward to the main event. Maybe now we're going to start to see as well an assault on the town centre from multiple sides. Defenders of Aglon being sent forward again without the armour upgrade this one, but it's not the most important thing. Most of the Easterling units we've got over here are a little bit more defensive in nature anyway. Except for the Halberdiers, you could argue, with that armour piercing, but still. Feanor doing a decent job so far, but that catapult proving to be a problem. More damage going to be done. Halaborn taking a lot of damage there actually, and some collateral on Mounted Company of Carufin as well. More units are going to have to be committed to halt Parthan's assaults. These Wardens of Lothlan, maybe a little bit isolated at this point, and considering the amount of heavy swordsmen that Feanor are working with over here, that however is brutal. The frame rate dropping there, and they're actually damn lucky, Feanor, that Parthan didn't have that on Flaming Shot, because that could have been devastating. But as it is, it was merely a serious problem rather than absolutely crushing. Still the Archers of Amrod shooting into that giant blob. They'll be ratcheting off a very impressive kill count for themselves. Mounted Company of Carufin getting around to the back. This is where the Warband of Lothlan with the mountain and the catapult will be able to earn their pay though, because those spears will be coming into effect. And actually we'll need to go down to half speed once again, because things are going to be happening all across the settlement. Not for the first time, Archers of Amrod. Yeah, Parthan sending over some support as well into the flank to try and help his allies over on the side, which is a good thing. The Cursed of Alqualonde will of course be absolutely dominant against Froatani Marauders, but just getting some units in here to give Feanor more angles to have to cover is the important thing. This fight on the gate is actually going to be won by Feanor, but it's going to come at a pretty big cost. Rangers of Halaborn. What about this fight over here, which was going against Feanor for a while, but I mean, it is still going to go against them, I would suggest, but it is going to come at a much greater cost for the Easterlings than it initially looked like it was going to. So there is that. Like I said, I do think the Easterlings are still going to win, but like I said, for a complete victory, they would have been hoping for a greater margin. I don't think they're going to be allowed that. I think at best they're going to be seeing a partial victory here. A heroic defeat perhaps for Feanor is on the cards. Having to rely so much on shield bearers and Rangers of Halaborn in melee is ultimately going to pay a bit of a price for Feanor, though. You can see that they are routing now. Fleeing from the field, they will just go back to the town centre and be back for another fight later. You can see the Scribe Untitled is actually the first of the Easterling armies to make it into the town centre, but there's a very real chance that he will simply be sent packing again. I mean, there is only Rangers and Stalkers of Thargelion that are here, and considering the presence of Lothlan units, I'm not entirely sure the Stalkers of Thargelion are going to be able to hold without some pretty serious support, but again, time will tell. Bit of a rear charge from the cavalry might come in handy. Meanwhile, one last look at what's going on with this little counter-offensive from Feanor. Looks like it has actually been completely dealt with. Yeah, routing, so reinforcements from Tundra's Vox. Removing this thorn in their side once and for all. Still this one unit of Footmen of Amras, which has been up on the walls for quite a while at this point. But they're really the only thing on this side of the settlement that is still up and running. Salamanders are in the settlement as well, so a few fast movers. We've seen the Mounted Company of Carufin respond to potential crises within the city streets. The same can now be true of the Easterlings. Having fast-moving cavalry, it's difficult to use in a settlement, but it can prove to be surprisingly useful in any given situation. Easterlings continuing to grind away on this front line. The Halberdiers, says defeat seems certain. I'd be surprised if that didn't flick around though, given the fact that they're not really under any sort of ranged fire anymore, and they should be able to situate themselves quite comfortably on the front line from this point onwards. I would have thought. Elsewhere in the settlement, more units pushing forward now. Orders of Himring, balance of forces is evenly matched. I mean, a lot of the units that are here from the Easterlings and Orders of Himring, Fangs of the Faithless, they are not the best in melee, as I mentioned at the start with regards to the Fangs, but the quality of the Footmen of Amras and Defenders of Aglon is buying Feanor a good deal of wiggle room here. Footmen of Amras charging into the Easterlings that remain. Archers of Amrod firing missiles from on high as well. Although they are firing point blank into the Sons of Ulfang while they're being distracted by these footmen. I'm actually surprised, like the Sons of Ulfang for the most part have been focused down pretty well by Feanor, and that's to be expected because they do represent a serious threat in the way that a lot of Easterling infantry does not to Feanor. But a lot of them have been placed under this kind of treatment, routing in the face of consistent arrow fire. So the flanking movement from Parthan is also being sent packing, but it was merely a distraction anyway. But each of these Easterling attacks is costing them a lot, you have to say. Parthan, I think, is finally breaking through now, though. These units trying a mighty counter-attack by the looks of things, but not really able to have the same effect as it was to mere elements of Scribe Untitled's army. Here, Parthan's main force, and I'm not sure what, to be honest, Feanor were hoping to accomplish here. A bit of a Hail Mary, perhaps, but it hasn't come off, and that may be enough to bring defeat down upon them. Wardens of Lothland now charging forth. Defenders of Aglon, there's still plenty of Feanor heavy swordsmen contributing to their team's hopes of winning. The band of Lothan are shaken though, like I said. Feanor general being lost, but maybe morale shocks are something Feanor can use to their advantage, but there's still... They themselves, I think, I would be worried about. I mean, they will only go back to the town centre, but they need to be putting up genuine resistance everywhere. There's still a few Lothland units in reserve that the Easterlings can commit forward just in case. So I do believe we're going to be seeing, in real terms here, from this point on, fairly high probability of an Easterling victory. Victory seems certain. Halberdiers starting to do their thing. Still archer ammunition though. What are they going after? Yeah. Shooting into the blob that's right below them. And it certainly has been costly, but it's had the feeling, perhaps intentionally, given the fact that the Easterlings went into this RP battle on the front foot, it has had the feeling of a constant fighting retreat for Feanor. No bodyguard tier units either. I wonder what sort of difference a unit of the Rogue Quenny would have made. A couple of units of Rogue Quenny with the Mounted Company of Carufin, maybe some good cavalry play could have saved them somewhat. There's still a decent amount of Feanor resistance over here though, but I think they are going to need to commit reinforcements over to this position here. These Archers of Amrod are shaken. They're actually being pulled off the front line by Farkins. This is a dangerous game to be playing, being tagged out by Footmen of Amras. They still have ammunition, and this is a very understandable move because they're going to need all of their archers to be using all of their ammunition. And again, we're seeing the Halberdiers on this front line as well, proving to be the thing which puts the Easterlings really on a similar sort of level here, in spite of the fact that Defenders of Aglon and Footmen of Amras outclass the Lothland units. That range, long pointy sticks are overpowered, especially when you apply the ability to crunch through armour with them, both in games and in real life. Defenders of Aglon getting pushed ever further backwards by yet another unit of halberdiers as well, and as much as Feanor have been using their projectiles to pretty good effect, as we've been seeing throughout this battle really, they simply haven't had enough of them. Haven't seen many Stalks of Thargelion using their ammunition. Most of the time we've been seeing them, it's been sort of being desperately thrown in as makeshift infantry, but they are the weakest of all Feanor's units when it comes to being a melee combatant. More sort of desperation settings than anything else. And Parthan's army is going to continue its unrelenting march. Tundra's Fox also with a few units. The town centre now very much surrounded on all sides. Another unit of Sons of Ulfang, having taken a little bit of damage on the outer walls, but that armour piercing will be much appreciated. But to be fair, this angle is being defended mostly by the human elements of the Feanor army, so maybe it won't be as imperative that their presence is felt. More Feanor units simply trying to stand in the way of the Easterlings at the moment. It is going to be a victory for the men of the East, but by what sort of margin? Will it have been a worthwhile assault? Will they be able to consolidate their gains in the RP after this, or will they have made a bit of an error? Will Feanor simply be able to retake this land with a reconsolidated force? A lot of cleanup is going to be needed in the settlement, regardless of whose banners are flying over it by the end of the day. More retreating going on, trying to consolidate around the town centre. Salamandering Guard firing in, another Feanor general loses, so this is where the cascading failure begins, really, for the elves. It's been a while since we've seen either of these two factions in a Silmarillion replay. It's good to see both of them again in artillery as well. This is where real problems could begin. It's all about efficiency from this point onwards from the Easterlings. Can they dispense with their foes as effectively and as quickly as possible to keep as many of their own men alive as they can? Defenders of Aglon, I think, seem certain. I mean, we have seen throughout the battle these heavy swordsmen from Feanor doing a good job. Of course, they are in the town centre, so they will fight to the bitter end, but damage is what it is. That is the final Feanor general, so all three defending generals have now been lost. This is actually the second of the... I mean, this isn't a standard medieval 2 settlement, of course, because it's got elven architecture and those walkways, but it's the first settlement that you would see on a campaign map, for example, that we've seen in quick succession, really, with also the Isengard defence recently in Reforged being on one of the classic medieval 2 layouts. Kind of neat to see these again, given that they kind of have to be a little bit more varied. A lot of the custom maps do tend to devolve into a choke pointy affair after a certain amount of time. Defenders of Aglon still very much alive. Footmen of Amras, I mean, we have seen the sort of mid to upper tier elven units that Feanor have at their disposal be very effective in this battle, but we have also seen the difference that bodyguard tier units can make. Maybe less so in the Sons of Ulfang, but the solidity of the Amberona Honour Guard has definitely been on display here. But also numbers. And a settlement like this, maybe in a more custom map, where it was more heavily choke point focused, Feanor would have been able to hold on, but because it's a settlement like this and there are more angles they have to cover, especially seeing as palisade walls are easier for artillery to knock their way through, it's a lot for a defender to have to try and cover, and especially seeing as they were caught a little bit flat-footed in the RP, I believe, with this. On the quote-unquote campaign map, they left it all for themselves to do, and you can see here, I mean, it's pretty much all of the armies we can see at this point, but it is the vast majority Easterling at this stage, and it's more a case of let the slaughter begin, I suppose. But also I think one of the big MVPs, of course, for the Easterlings, as it was always going to be, Halberdiers of Lothland. Phalanx units we've already seen in Med 2 be exceptionally effective. They are less prevalent in Silmarillion, you have to say, but factions that don't have them, like Feanor, do need to work around that fact. And of course the fact that halberdiers are armour piercing as well is another feather in their cap when they're facing off against a force like Feanor. Maybe more cavalry would have been the answer, maybe being bold like that, but maybe they didn't have a choice. Archers of Amrod did a good job, but there's only so much that archers are going to be able to do with their ammunition supply. The real question is going to be, have they made the Easterlings bleed enough for this eventual victory? Fighting back to back at this point.
Our enemy has command of the city.
The jaws of death snapping shut. Looks Vlothlin. The more defensive of all of the units, of course. Halberdiers have never been left to their own devices really in this fight either. We've seen a couple examples of them having to be used on their own, but of course phalanx units do need support generally speaking, and the Eastlings have been pretty good at doing that. The initial part of the assault was a little bit fragmented, but as soon as they got ahead of steam and the wind in their sails, they claimed the momentum and never surrendered it again, and Feanor crushed underfoot. Having a look at this, yeah, I'd say that it wasn't really not enough damage done by Feanor, I think. So I think that the Eastlings can actually claim the full victory they were seeking, at least from my perspective, looking at the percentages. Maybe they needed it to be utterly overwhelming in the RP, but I kind of doubt it. I think that a solid margin of victory here, and the Eastlings getting a little bit of reinforcements in, consolidate their gains, and then they can move forth. There we go. Good play though from both sides. I mean, considering it was always going to be a very difficult affair for Feanor to come out on top of, they did do a lot of damage, but in the end not enough, I don't think. I do think the Eastlings handled this pretty well, a little bit fragmented at the start like I mentioned, but as the battle wore on they certainly moved in tandem a little bit more, supporting one another with flanking moves, and in spite of the fact that some players like Dead Salmon ended up taking a lot of damage, sometimes you just got to be the one that takes damage when you're on the attack, attacking a settlement such as this. And yeah, interesting to see the effective units. The initial cavalry sallying forth was pretty good, but I don't actually think the Mounted Company of Carufin paid for themselves in terms of what they cost in the end. It certainly contributed to the fact that the Eastlings' initial attack was a little bit more stretched, but that's the sort of thing you can't really put a kill value to. I don't know. I feel as though the Mounted Company of Carufin started off well, but they really did fall off, and the Eastlings have something to do with that as well. Tundra's Fox committing some extra Salamandrine Guard to isolate and destroy them. There was a little bit of work done from them in the interior as well, but yeah, that was one of the units I think which maybe didn't pull its weight for Feanor. Based on the amount of armoured units that are left as well, I would question how well used the ranges of Hellevorn ammunition was. Like I said, we didn't actually see any of the Stalkers really use their javelins, but it's a little bit less important because they're more skirmishing javelins, so they've got a bigger ammo supply, but they're not going to be able to do as much damage to the heavier Easterling units. What did do the business for Feanor, though, like I said, the heavier infantry. Footmen of Amras showed its quality, as did the defenders of Aglon, and the archers of Amrod as well in those walkways were able to rack up a kill count, I'm sure, like we'll see in just a moment. As for the Easterlings, Salamandrine Guard started off, it was kind of the opposite to the Mounted Company of Carufin really, started off a little bit rough for them, but then they were used to counter that cavalry pretty well. As far as infantry goes though, like I said, the extra survivability and quality of the Amberona Honour Guard here and there where they were deployed was fairly decisive, but more than anything, halberdiers of Vlothlin, and Feanor really did struggle to deal with them. They tried their best with their projectiles, but they just didn't have enough in the end. Let's see what did the damage though for Feanor. So Accursed of Alqualonde, perhaps a unit which was rather an obvious target for the attackers to try and focus down, because it was the highest tier infantry, well, highest tier unit in general actually Feanor had fielded. Defenders of Aglon breaking 100 kills, Footmen of Amras, so yeah, not too surprising there. Rangers of Hellevorn, that's not enough kills for me from an armour-piercing javelin unit, in spite of the fact they don't have as much ammunition, but yeah, Archers of Amrod. So like I said, really the triumvirate of heavy upper-end elven units that Feanor had access to, seemingly doing the business. More kills on the Accursed of Alqualonde from Wally Wolf's army, but again, Archers of Amrod doing much of the heavy lifting. Defenders of Aglon as well, less so on his Footmen of Amras, and then Farkin's army, 208 kills. So actually these two armies, the Accursed doing a pretty good job, but then you kind of expect it, because even if they do get caught in melee in in a fight in which they're overwhelmed, the fact they are relentless means they will go down swinging. You can't stun lock them to death. 106 kills on a unit of shield bearers of Hellborn isn't too bad at all. Archers of Amrod and Footmen of Amras doing the business. Defenders of Aglon once again. So yeah, maybe a little bit more of a mixed bag than I was expecting, but ultimately, yeah, the Elven contingent doing much of the work for Feanor, but not enough of the work as it turns out, because I would say that the Easterlings not only achieved victory, but achieved victory to an acceptable margin, given that this is an RP battle. So yeah, big thank you to Lord of Balagost for sending this one in. Big thanks to all of the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. Congratulations to the Easterlings, and I'm not sure at this point, considering it's been about 3 weeks since Lord of Balagost gave this one to me. I don't know how the RP has progressed since then, but maybe the Easterlings do find themselves in a consolidated position, or maybe they have been counterattacked by Feanor, or perhaps by someone else. We shall wait and see, because I'm sure we'll see at least 1 or 2 more RP battles coming out from the Silmarillion Discord, which I can show. Got a couple of other Silmarillion battle replays as well. These I don't know if they're actually from the RP, but I'll take a look at them, and it'll be very easily determined by the fact that it'll be unified factions. But yeah, this was the first one that I got sent, so it makes sense that it's the first one that I show, and it's been a little while since we've seen both of these factions, as I mentioned in the battle itself. So yeah, there will be a little bit more Silmarillion coming up in the next 2-3 weeks. There will also, of course, be more Reforged on the way. I think the very next battle replay that we show will be on a map that we've seen time and time again, to be honest with you, because it will be, I think, Bersagath, but it was the last battle that Winged Swordsman 44 sent me in his clutch of replays, and like I mentioned at the end of one of the recent battles, I do want to get through all of them, so I think that one will honestly be the next one that we see, and then hopefully we'll see a little bit more from him in the near future as well. I've got a couple of interesting ones from Filler as well, including one that is, he says, starts off as a pitch and ends as a siege, and it is a map that has settlements and fortresses on it, but is kind of a pitch battle as well. So I mean, the map choice is certainly correct. We'll see how that one goes, so we'll be seeing that one fairly soon also. I mean, by this point I have actually got my videos recorded about a month in advance, so there may also be ones that get pushed to the front of the queue based on the fact that they're either like a new map or something similar. But again, that's the sort of thing which I can't really predict too easily. There will also, of course, be another Knockout Tourney video coming out in the next couple of weeks as well. That's my intention. I think it will probably be Shock Infantry. We recently did Shielded Infantry, so we'll probably do Shock Infantry next as well. Then we can do Sword Cavalry, and then we can look at Archers, although Archers might be a little bit more difficult to do given how uncooperative the AI is in that respect. But yeah, that'll be the last one that we do for that reason. And yeah, then we can look at, hopefully by then I can start looking forward to doing maybe a few faction overviews for the next patch, fingers crossed. I mean, again, getting through those 3 knockout tourney battles will probably take us, probably do 1 every month, so that gives us a bit more of a cushion, but again, we can only wait and see, can't we? But yeah, enough rambling. I think there is still the spectre of the live stream channel update that I do intend to do. But like I said, that'll probably be towards the tail end of summer, because I will have a more concrete idea of what's actually going to be happening by that point. I kind of think I know at this point what's going to be happening, but I need to wait until I'm 100% sure that something else isn't happening first before I can press ahead with the idea which I now have in my head about what's going to be happening towards the end of the year as a whole. But I mean, the gist of things is that the channel is going to maintain as it is for the rest of 2022, and then 2023 is where things are going to pretty much immediately, I think, change. But we can go through the details when I have a little bit more of an idea of that, and we can talk about it in a live stream, hopefully. But yeah, like I said, enough rambling. I've made a real habit of rambling at the end of these battle splash screens, and most people probably don't stick around for them anyway, so it is what it is. Irregardless of that, more Silmarillion, more Reforged, various stuff is going to be happening as well throughout the rest of the year, I'm sure. So hopefully you can stick with me before I can start ratcheting up the channel again in the following year. So yeah, big thanks to all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.